Good Friday morning, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Finding God in the Dark podcast. I'm Don,
And I'm Jonathan.
and today we are going to talk about a film that we are really enamored with. Surprisingly, because Jonathan doesn't particularly like horror movies,
Yeah.
and I'm not a big fan of vampire movies in general.
Yeah.
But we saw the film Sinners, which I think is still in a few theaters. It's
Yeah.
now on streaming. I think Amazon. It's a pay per view on Amazon.
It's a rent or buy right now. Yeah.
Um, it is directed by Ryan Coogler,
Mhm.
stars Michael B. Jordan and a host of other folks who are familiar names.
Yeah.
But I don't have the IMDb pulled up right now because I'm looking at our notes.
Yeah.
Well, our notes, Jonathan's notes, uh, that he shares with me. So I'll take credit.
Sure, why not?
And boy, oh boy, where do we start with this film? We just discussed this right before we started recording. There is so much depth and meaning and theme and I mean, particularly for a horror movie and B, a vampire movie, there's so much in this film that is really worth discussing. So we're obviously not going to get to all of it.
Yeah.
So let's prioritize. Where do you want to start, Jonathan?
Well, I thought it was interesting how he really created the world of the Mississippi Delta in the 30s. Like there was so much there that he didn't put a lot of exposition in it, but there's just layers. So, like for example, I watched this with my kids, and we should give a spoiler warning. Warning: we're going to talk a lot about this movie, and a lot about
Talk
the.
about the movie, and yeah, there's a lot that
Yeah,
we can't help but spoil it. So if
yeah,
you haven't seen it, and you want to see it, stop here, go
yeah,
watch it, and come
yeah.
back.
So it was interesting that it allowed me to talk. It was interesting. It allowed me to talk to my sons when we watched it together about a lot of stuff in that time period without giving a lot of exposition. So, for example, one of the main characters, Sammy, which is interesting, it's his first movie. It's the actor's first movie, which he did an amazing job. But he's picking cotton at the beginning of the movie, and he's clearly very poor. He's in his bare feet, he's like, and he goes back to this kind of base where everybody's there, and there's a bunch of really poorly constructed homes. And it was interesting when my sons go, "Is this set during slavery?" And I go, "No, this is set after slavery, during a time where there were people called sharecroppers, where they were essentially slaves because the white folks still owned the land and they had to work for them and they had to pay them now, but they paid them very little. And so conditions really didn't change that much.
Yeah.
And so it gave me a chance to talk about that. Later on in the movie, you go by a chain gang, and you hear the story of one of the characters talk about how he was arrested for vagrancy, which a lot of folks don't know. The 13th Amendment, which outlawed slavery, gave a little clause for you could force people to work for you if they were doing punishment for a crime. And so some communities found that loophole, and they would arrest African
Yeah.
American men for vagrancy, which meant they were just hanging out. They weren't necessarily doing anything.
Right.
And they were forced to work again as slaves. So, like, those things were in the movie, and yet there wasn't an exposition about it. It just allowed you to frame those issues. Another issue is one of the characters, Mary, is a mixed race individual. And in that culture, in that time, if you had a little bit of African American in you, you were African American. And so she has this powerful statement one time where she's kind of yelling back at her ex-boyfriend. She goes, I didn't want to be white. I wanted to be with you." Meaning, if you would have allowed me to just live with you, everyone would have accepted me as black. You
Mhm.
forcing me to go to Arkansas and hide the fact I was mixed race, you know, and so it allows you to have a conversation about the reality that race is a construction. It isn't something that's there. It's something we create, and so all those pieces are in this horror movie, which is
Yeah.
just fascinating.
Which it's funny. Even I think some of it even speaks to today when because you're talking about sharecroppers,
Yeah.
right? So these people that worked for below wage, below minimum wage, below well, there was no minimum wage back then, but for basically slave labor,
Well, they
and
often, yeah,
and to hear people even today arguing for that with immigrants, right?
yes,
With people who come here, well, who's going to pick your crops?
yeah.
Well, if you pay, I think people would do it if you paid a decent wage.
Well, and the reality is why aren't we having a conversation about why should we want people to have to work for very little money? Why shouldn't we talk about the fact that our crops are not being sold at an actual price which people can sustain in a living wage? Like, why aren't we having that conversation? Or at one point they have a conversation about wooden nickels, which is
Fiction money.
sharecroppers
Yeah.
would oftentimes pay these folks who were former slaves with money they had to use at the farmer's store, basically. And
Hmm.
so literally required these workers to have to depend and pay back, basically pay back the owner for working for them.
That was and that was only as deep as that is, only like a side thing in the story. It's not even like the main.
It's
We should probably lay out kind of the
yeah,
main thrust of the story is these two twins who are both played by Michael B. Jordan,
yeah,
Smoke and Stack,
yeah,
have used to live in this area, had gone to Chicago, kind of made their bones in the mob, but then
yeah,
took a lot of money and came back, and they're going to set up this speakeasy
yeah.
for the black folks.
Mhm.
And yeah, I don't want to get too far into how where that goes in the end credit scene.
Yeah,
But they buy this building
yeah,
and they set this up, and the actor who you mentioned, it's his first film, he plays blues music,
yeah,
and they hire him to play. Um, that is such a huge angle in this film.
yes.
The music.
It
Uh,
really, you could argue it's part musical. There are three major musical numbers, and they're really well done. Like
yeah,
they're done in a musical. They're done in the quality you would expect from a musical movie.
yeah.
So
Yeah, and I think well this blues music, I mean just that was one of the first things I said. I took my 19-year-old daughter, who is in college. She is for those who don't know me, my 19-year-old is adopted African American. She wanted to see this movie. I took her to see it. And when we got in the car afterwards, she asked me, what was your, like kind of your first impression of the film? I said, man, the music. The
yeah,
music just blew me away. It was so good and so well done.
and
Um,
yeah, sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead. You
No,
want to say
it's just fascinating. I've seen a couple things with the director Ryan Coogler, and he talks about he uses Celtic music in here as well.
something?
Um,
Yeah.
and he brings together, which is fascinating. He brings together two musical genres that were present in the Delta at the time, and they kind of weave together, and they give aspects of the character, which is interesting. The characters are revealed in the songs, like who they are, what they're doing, what their motivations are, and
Mhm.
so it's just really. It was, I mean, I was just amazed how well he layered all of these different types of movies together, a romance, a musical, a horror movie, an movie. He really just kind of brings all this stuff together, which is impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the music plays into one thing. It was like the first thing you said to me about this film before I had even seen it
Yeah,
was go and see this because there is a scene I have to talk about.
yeah, yeah,
So talk
yeah.
about that scene.
Sure, absolutely. So The first musical scene is a scene where the movie starts off with a kind of introduction that talks about that many cultures have talked about the idea that there are people that can play music so deeply and so spiritually that it opens up the world and it opens up time. And this is something that you find in different cultures. And Sammy is a character in the movie that can do this. He has the gift of this musical gift. And so he starts playing and the first musical scene, and he opens time up, and we see all these different types of African music, all these different types of Asian music, because two of the characters, again, Coogler brings in the reality that there were a lot of Chinese immigrants in the Delta, during this time, and so he brings in their music, and so you see these characters from different points of time in the future and in the past. So you have rappers, you have folks who are African dance, you have Asian dance, and what's interesting is I think you've watched enough movies, I've watched enough movies to know that a lesser director would have made that seem really corny and it would have been really weird and he does it so well it seems to make sense. And
Yeah.
what I loved about it was this kind of splitting of time is something we believe as Christians happens when we come to the communion table. That we that literally, whether you look at it as Luther, we ascend to heaven, or Calvin, heaven descends, or sorry, Luther, heaven descends to us, or Calvin, we ascend up to heaven. The idea is that the body of Christ comes together at this table, past, present, and future, and so we are joined with our brothers around the corner, but we're also joined with our grandparents, that have passed on. And I really have never seen a scene in film that kind of speaks to what I think happens at communion. This kind of melding together of time and spirit and power. And I just thought it was beautiful. Um, and I thought it was just an amazing way to talk about this idea of the veil between the spiritual and the natural, the supernatural and the natural. This idea of we aren't distant from people who have gone beyond. They're still here with us. They join with us, and I just thought it was really a beautiful scene.
Yeah, I tell you, it's the scene itself. It feels a little disjointed
Yeah,
and kind of a little jarring, and
yeah,
yet there's so much like, not just, I mean, you mentioned rap music and Chinese and Indian
yeah,
and but even like somebody I think was supposed to be Jimi Hendrix,
yeah, yeah,
showed up playing rock guitar,
yeah, yeah. Mhm.
and all melded into this one. And yes, it does feel jarring, and yes, it does feel a little disjointed. But if we were really experiencing that kind of lifting of the veil,
Yeah.
it would feel that way. It
Yeah,
wouldn't be like, oh,
yeah,
this is perfect and great. It would
yeah.
feel like, whoa.
Yeah. It's this idea of if we open ourselves to what we think, what we believe as Christians happens at the table,
Mhm.
then we would feel a power and a kind of a charge that I think would be jarring. It would wake you up. It would shake you up.
And I think I've said this a few times because as the one who's serving,
Mhm.
there have been a few times, particularly with children, when children come to the rail and when they receive that. And look, I get it; they don't fully understand what's going on here. But there's such an emotional response from kids that they're included, that they get to experience this, that that it's not like, no, 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 you stay in your seat or you go to the nursery or whatever, but that there's such joy in it. And then if you have the one loaf and you just offer the loaf and the kids take for themselves, you watch how many of the adults do this, they get a
Yeah,
little pinch, and kids are like, "Give me-"
yeah, yeah,
like this is the grace you're entitled to or
yeah.
something.
I want some
Um,
great.
yeah, and to me, I mean, I'm sold, like I am completely bought in when you see that response from kids that they,
Yeah.
even though they don't understand it, they're included and they participate.
Yeah.
And I think it's a similar kind of thing. Um, and that scene, I mean, is huge. And I think it relates to um just all of the music in the film.
Hmm.
Like you said, there's this whole scene with the okay, we talked about spoilers. Spoiler
Yeah.
alert. The vampires in the film are white.
Hmm.
Most of the Almost all of the people in the bar or in the club are black.
Yeah.
And the vampires, in order to try to entice you get into the bar, portray themselves as a Celtic music group. They've come to play too, you know. um, and the kind of the lead guy, what's his name? Remick, I think.
No,
Uh,
Rebecca.
he's Irish.
Hmm.
So there's this sense that he really wants Sammy.
Yep.
Like, yeah, he'll
He
take
says that.
everybody.
He
He
says that.
really wants Sammy though, because and I love what he says. I want your stories.
I want your stories. I want your songs. Yeah.
I want your stories. I want your songs. Because it's a slightly different take on the vampire, almost this hive mind or communal mind
Mhm.
thing, where when someone becomes a part of that community, they all have the memories of all of the others.
Yeah.
Um, so it's really a fascinating take and a whole different kind of angle on this community idea, isn't it?
Well, it's interesting because it's this idea of community at my discretion, community at my control. You
Yeah.
know, I want you part of this community, but I want you to be who I am. I want you to be part of me instead of this idea of I just want you to be a part of this group and you're going to change the group and I'm going to change the group. And so he has this idea of I want. It's like I want your stories, I want
Yeah.
your songs.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's interesting because you pair it with something that Delta Slim, one of the characters, says earlier, where he talks about an experience where he's been arrested, and the sheriffs take him and his partner around to play, and they go to a white party one night, and he talks about how white people like black, or white people like blues, but they just don't like the people that make it, and it's this idea of um, control on my terms, right? Membership on my terms. So you can get this narrative if you want about the idea of African Americans passing or African Americans trying to fit in and be white, instead of being who they are. Kind of all of these things that are taking place sociologically in the 1930s in the Delta, right? This kind of confluence of white. And what's interesting is most people don't know that when the Irish first arrived in America, they were viewed as black, not because of their skin color, but because they were viewed as lower class. They were viewed as dangerous, right? And so, again, you get this kind of idea about the barriers we put around each other and the definitions we give each other are often things we impose on each other, not things that really exist.
Yeah. 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 Well, okay. What else do we want to say here?
Well, I think to me, we probably should talk about some people have pushed back on this movie and said, yeah, it's a great movie, but it's anti-religious. It's, you know, it kind of sets up music is a
Okay.
good
Well,
thing.
we didn't say that what's his name, the main character there? Sonny?
Sammy.
Sammy. Sammy is the son of a preacher.
Yeah,
And initially, his father says, if you want to play this music, you play it in the church, play it for God.
yeah,
And he chooses to not do that.
yeah. Well, the movie folds in on itself. It starts with Sammy coming to the church after the attack, the morning after the attack,
Right.
and it ends at the same place.
Right.
And his father goes, put the guitar down, basically come to the church. receive forgiveness kind of thing. And
Mhm.
you have another time where Delta Slim is talking to Sammy, and um, in effect, Christianity was forced on us, but this music we brought with us. So this idea that the blues music is us, but Christianity really is something that's been forced on us. And I think there's a strong critique of religion in this movie, but I would also argue it's not anti-religious as much as it's very skeptical about how these powerful things in our life, religion, love, music, how they're used. Are they used to give us freedom or are they used to control us? And so I don't think, because you could argue the music at points is trying to be used to control, right? Or at least to hide who the vampires are. They're using the sheen of beautiful music to kind of try to hide who they are and what they want. Love is used in a positive way. There's a beautiful scene at the end when I think no, not Stack. Smoke is dying, where there's this beautiful kind of he reignites with a child he lost, and so you get this kind of beautiful idea of love. But at the other frame, love is misused as passion and desire, and it kind of cuts through and leads to violence, right? I don't know. I feel like it's more of a movie that's skeptical about these powerful things in our life and how they're used to either bring us freedom or control us. I guess that's how
Well,
I'd read it.
there's a well, you put I don't remember the quote was in the movie, but you put is religion the opiate of the masses. That's a Karl Marx quote, is it not?
That is a Karl Marx. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a Karl Marx quote. That isn't in the movie.
Oh, okay.
I put it as a theme, because again, I want to get to this idea: is does this film view religion as something that controls people and not frees people? I guess I feel like it's more nuanced than that.
Yeah.
It is arguing sometimes religion is. I mean, they literally have a scene where Sammy is trying to survive the vampire attack by saying the Lord's Prayer, and the vampires start saying it with him.
Sitting
So
with him, yeah.
there is this idea that religion can be used, and sometimes is used, to control us and control people. But I would argue that I feel like almost everything that's powerful and life-giving in this movie is shown to also have a way you can misuse it.
Well, and is I think realistically, is that not just the nature of the world?
Yeah,
I think anything can be
yeah,
controlling
yeah,
or freeing
yeah,
depending on how you use it. I think it's one of those things for us as pastors. We hear that, often, I'm going to do a series on this, in the world and not of the world,
yeah,
right? Except that that's not in the Bible.
yeah,
Those words are not in the Bible.
yeah.
There is a passage in John where Jesus said, "The world will hate you because you follow me."
Mm.
But the reality of it is, we still live in this world and we still have to engage in this world and with this world.
And in that
And
same gospel, the text says that, God so loved the world.
um, so, there's that. I think it depends on it, as always, depends on how you can leverage
Yeah.
that,
Well,
right?
again, it goes to another theme of this movie, which is a very prominent theme in most vampire movies. What do you let in?
Yeah, yeah,
What do you let into your
yeah.
soul? What do you let into your heart? What do you let into your mind? And that's something that I think we do, all of us, I know I do, I struggle with, is to really reflect on, is this helping me if I watch this? Is this bringing something into my heart and mind that might lead me in a bad way or in a bad path? Like,
Right.
we get bombarded with so much technology, we get bombarded with so many movies and TV shows and music that sometimes we don't think about how it's affecting us and we don't reflect on it. And I mean, that is something that I think people of faith should try to step back and reflect on. What am I letting in? What am I, what am I surrounding myself with? And how is that impacting my life?
Yeah. Well, and I think there's two ways to look at that, right? So the first is obvious in the film or in a lot of it's almost like vampire canon, that they can't come in, a vampire can't come in unless they're invited,
Yeah.
right? And that's most vampire movies, not all of them, but most of them.
Yeah.
But the other, and maybe sort of a counter idea to what you're saying, is not just what do I let in, but if it is in, how do I redeem it?
Yeah.
How do what is in my life already? How do I? And I think that's part of what we do here
Hmm.
is to look at culture and try to redeem it, right? How do I make this speak the gospel in some way, shape, or form?
Or
Um,
how do I allow it to challenge a viewpoint and make me reflect on something or think
exactly.
about
Yeah.
something? Yeah.
Yeah, and I that's a I mean it's a prominent theme in any vampire film or most vampire films at least. But again, take it a step further. When it's in, how do I redeem it?
Yeah.
You know.
Absolutely.
Um, so what else? Uh,
Um, I don't know. I think there's a lot about community here, um, an
yeah,
idea of what centers a community, what misshapes a community. Um, I don't know. I think it's just to me. I didn't catch it till I bought this movie a couple days ago because I wanted to show it to my kids, and I've watched it now twice in like probably 72 hours. Um, and there's an end credit scene. So at the what you think is the end of the movie, let the credits roll, and there's a scene that is very, I think, important. And at the end of this scene, two of the vampires, I won't give it all away, but two of the vampires have survived, and it's 60 years later, and they find Sammy, and they're not threatening Sammy or anything. They're just kind of re-engaging with Sammy, and at the very end, they're leaving after Sammy plays them a song because I think it's interesting. They want to hear the music in real time and real space. It's just kind of interesting. And as they're leaving, he turns to the vampires and he said, I wake up probably once a week in terror because of that night, but also it's the greatest day of my life. I realized before the sunset, it was the greatest day of my life. How about you? And one of the characters turns around to him and he says, Yes, it was for me too. Before the sun went down, it was we were free for a few hours. And again, I think that's that idea of that community because there's this beautiful scene where they're in that conversation. They kind of flash back, and you see all of the work that was put in to make this place, make this dance hall, make this speakeasy come to life. Right? The hard work of all the people that put stuff down and cook the food and all this stuff. And then he goes, for a few hours we were free. And you realize that community at its best frees us.
yeah,
And that's that's what the church is going for. That's what people in the world in their healthiest way we're all going for. We're going for communities and forming communities that really set us free.
yeah. And that's interesting because I think the very opposite can be said too. Community at its best frees us, and at its worst enslaves us.
Absolutely.
Which is yeah. But we're working on as clergy, we're working on the one that sets us free, right?
Absolutely.
Let's hope. So I think we've got to kind of start to wrap that up.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, look, this is not a film for everybody.
No.
Okay.
There's a lot of sex and there's a lot of violence. So know
Yes. It is not a film for everybody. There are themes here, and I think there's ideas here that some people will not digest well.
no.
And
Absolutely.
understand that going in. If if you hear us talk about it and you're kind of excited about this film, understand there are things that you will it's violent, it's gory, um it's a horror movie, you know.
And I would argue I would argue Ryan Coogler wants to push you to think about things, push you to think about community, push you to think about race
Yes.
relationships, push you to think about power dynamics. And
Yes.
those things can be hard to deal with sometimes.
And I think he does it in a way, he wraps it in this film in a way that you have to analyze it like we're doing here in order to get to those things. I think if you look at this on a very superficial level, you go, well, that was interesting and exciting, and what's next? And if you don't think about this film,
Yeah.
I mean, you may well enjoy it, but I think there's a lot more here
Oh yeah.
to spur your thoughts, and again, that's why we do this.
Yeah.
So that being said, um, we're on to back to the Chosen for
Sounds
next
good.
week.
Sounds good.
So next week we're going to try to talk about season 4 of Chosen, and season 5 is out now on Prime. So
Oh,
if you're interested in seeing that, folks, I've been talking it up with folks at my church. A lot of folks who haven't seen it, and they're going, "Oh, is it really that good?" It's a lot better than I thought it was.
oh yeah.
It's a lot better than I expected it to be. So I'm thankful that we've started
Yeah,
to watch it because
I would definitely say I feel like it's uneven in terms of season. It's uneven, but there are some really high moments where they do the stories in the Bible. Yeah. Did I
oh,
freeze you?
we had a little break up there.
Okay.
The
So
technology, my internet here at the church has been wonky all week. So
all I said was I feel like at some points it's uneven,
mhm.
but there are some episodes that do themes in the Bible and the Gospels really well. So
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree. It's like I said, it's a lot better than I expected it to be. So that's our assignment. Your assignment, if you're following along for next week, is to get through season 4 of The Chosen. We'll talk about that next week. Until next Friday, friends, keep on finding God in the dark. We will see you all again next week. Take care and God bless.
bye.
Friends, thank you again for watching the Finding God in the Dark podcast. If you're finding these discussions helpful or meaningful in your Christian walk, then we'd invite you to go ahead and subscribe down below. Get more of this content. We publish every Friday morning at 10 a.m. And we're so glad that you can be with us and enjoy these discussions as well. Take care and God bless. Bye now.